Hello, and welcome to Psych 201, Chapter 4 on Research Ethics. The purpose of this is for us to gain understanding of what are the ethical norms that guide our research work and the practicalities of how we implement those norms for the protection of human subjects and animals participants. Our coverage today is going to be on some history, which is very important on this topic, and protections that are in place due to what we've learned from that history. Before World War II, there was really very little besides the personal standards of ethics of a researcher to protect participants in a study. However, they thought participants should be treated whatever decisions they personally made, whatever their standards, that's what guided things. And this led to some egregious practices that were particularly revealed in World War II and after World War II during the Nuremberg trials and similar trials of Japanese scientists and military persons, in which we found there was horrific treatment for the purposes of medical and psychological research by the Germans and the Japanese, among others. And lest we get too confident that the Americans were not engaging in some not too nice research, we shall see in a few moments that some of the same thinking had us in trouble and led eventually to what we have today, which is fairly reasonable practices. These study revelations in the 1970s from medical and psychological studies led to the Belmont Commission and eventually the Belmont Report, which guides our decision making on the ethics of research today. The infamous Tuskegee syphilis study was started in 1932, and in this study, participants in Tuskegee, Alabama, were recruited and told that they were going to be in a study that would allow them access to medical care, many of whom in this relatively rural area of Alabama had never had in their life, did not even imagine they could ever get access to. These persons were poor, and they generally, almost all of them, were African American. So in 1932, these persons whose parents very likely had been slaves, and if not their parents, certainly their grandparents, are seeing an opportunity to have access to a system that had been denied to them. They were not informed, however, of the reason for the study, that it was to study the effects of syphilis. They were not told that anything about how they were being treated, and when they were not told these things, they were not told that they had syphilis, that there was basically a lack of factual and appropriate and correct information being given to these participants in the study. They were also misinformed about the benefits of the procedures that were done to them. One of the most notable examples of that, and your book describes this, is spinal taps, an extremely painful procedure if you've never had it done, was done to obtain cerebral spinal fluid to see how it had been affected by the infection. But they were told, the participants were told, hey, this is just part of a treatment that will help you, when in fact there's no real benefit. There's no benefit at all that can come from that. They lost their opportunity to join the military when World War II came along because they had syphilis. And because they could not join, there's all kinds of subsequent benefits that came from to persons who had been in World War II, the opportunity to have a career in the military that could lead to a retirement, a middle-class income, and better for persons who were raised in absolute poverty in many cases, was denied to these persons. And this is particularly egregious because at the outset of World War II, there were effective treatments that had been developed. Penicillin, for one, was known to be effective in curing syphilis. They were not given it then, so they could subsequently join the military if they desired. And furthermore, it was withheld from them for a further 25 years after that, allowing them to continue to suffer a disease that not only has immediate impact, but has has permanent, ongoing, debilitating and increasingly debilitating activities in the body. In the 1960s and 70s, a whistleblower named Peter Buxton finally got the word about the study. He initially attempted to get the word out within the various federal agencies that were in charge of this program, and when they did not act in any responsible way to his concerns, he went to the news media and blew the whistle on this, got the word out. And of course, there was, quite appropriately, a huge public outcry about the treatment of these persons. So that's one element that gets a huge public outcry, leads us to some sense of something needs to be done about these crazy scientists and such. The Milgram studies of obedience also were informative about these issues. In those studies, if you may remember, those participants were asked to give electric shocks to others who were supposed to be learners. And the participants, if you've seen videos of this, show extreme psychological stress in having to engage in this kind of behavior. And as such, and this was noted by Milgram at the time, and he did many variations on the study to try to show what could and could not reduce the amount of obedience in persons who were doing these, engaging and shocking people. And so you've got a situation where you're putting people in enormous psychological stress. And this was taken into account in the Belmont Commission's work eventually. But we did learn really important things. Many people did not think it was reasonable to expect that people in general would obey all the way up to obviously damaging levels of electric shock, and could not imagine that they would do it. All of you hearing this right now are really confident, I'm sure, that you would never do such a thing. The fact of the matter is we are extremely likely to obey those that we have some sense are in a position of authority. And so by learning that people will do this, it is not just rule-following Germans who would do such things, but also ourselves, we have some sense that this is a general principle of being human, that we do tend to follow those to whom we've given some sense of authority. This gives us a sense that there sometimes is an ethical balance between the risks to participants and the value of knowledge to be gained. And it's difficult to assess it. If we don't learn some of the things that we want to learn, that's an ethical question too. Don't we have an ethical obligation to society to learn important things about how humans act, about how humans function physically? These are important things to do also. And so finding the balance between risk and value gained and having it assessed independently is the key outcome of the Belmont Commission. You don't do things just because you want to. You do them because you know there's going to be value gained, and you do it in such a way as to minimize the potential for risk. So we have the Belmont Commission get established in the wake of Tuskegee and also in the wake of the revelations of Milgram studies and other studies that were gaining some public note about how persons reacted to being in risky research or troubling research. This was an interesting commission in many ways, and one of the most important persons that was on the commission was Dorothy Height, probably one of the most important leaders, civil rights leaders in the history of this nation that you may not have heard of. She was an African American born in the Pittsburgh area, spent a good deal of her life in New York and in Baltimore, and she was key advisor to presidents and secretaries of state and others in this nation on helping to ensure that persons who were not in positions of power and authority still had their rights protected. She served on this commission as a representative of the African American community, but also as a person of great esteem and recognition in her knowledge and understanding of these issues. I think it's important that all of us know about persons such as Dorothy Height if you've never heard of her before. There's three core ethical principles that come out of the Belmont Commission. Number one, respect for persons. That is to say, we're going to treat them in such a way that we would want to be treated, that we're going to tell them everything we can about what's going to happen to them. We're going to respect their right to be in the study, to withdraw from the study, and otherwise have a full understanding of what the value of the study is and what's going to happen to them in the study. Beneficence. The idea of beneficence is to minimize the harm and maximize the benefits. To the extent that you do that, you've increased beneficence in the study. The participants in the study are minimally impacted for maximum outcome and knowledge and understanding. And if there's a way to increase beneficence in how you design and arrange your study, you should definitely seek it and implement it. And justice. Justice is the idea that the benefits and risks for this regarding the study are spread across society fairly. That whatever we learn positive from the study, the persons rich and poor from any given gender or ethnic group are equally going to have the opportunity to gain the value from these findings. And the risks also are spread, that we don't take advantage of persons who are in difficult circumstances to somehow exploit them for being in the research. And in fact, all of these things were failures of in the Tuskegee study. That in each of these things there was harm given where benefits were not great. Persons were not informed of what was happening to them at various points and given the opportunity to properly get treatment and leave the study, so a lack of respect. And justice was clearly not underway because persons who were in a disadvantaged state, who had a greater need for the benefits that were being given in terms of health care that was available, that was overly needed, and therefore these persons would seek it out to a greater degree of need compared to the benefits they were getting actually. And so all of these things end up becoming a problem in the Tuskegee story and are issues that we still make sure we pay attention to today because of the Belmont Report. How we implement the findings of the Belmont Report at every single institution that does research around the country that gets money from federal government and other sources is through what are referred to as institutional review boards. And Frostburg State University has an institutional review board. Its purpose is to examine the research that's done here to make sure it's done in accordance with the kinds of principles we have been talking about. These are required by law for any institutions receiving federal money, and it's practically required by nearly all organizations that do research, simply because if you want to get your work published somewhere, you're going to have to demonstrate that you had an IRB that reviewed it. And so it's going to be there whether or not you're getting federal money or not because of the way journals operate. There are issues going on now with some journals, how they operate, the fact that they're not necessarily operating in full accordance with this, and there may have to be some modifications to law in coming years. Now, the main job of IRBs is to ensure the safety of human participants. Are they being treated in such a way that they're not going to be hurt and injured? We're going to be comparing the risks to the benefits of the research to make sure that we don't have them undergoing any greater potential for harm than the opportunity for benefits to what we learn. And then the quality of research is also analyzed, but frankly that's done relatively poorly by IRBs. They are very focused on safety and benefits to the detriment of really understanding whether or not the research is being well done. And in fact, this is an issue that is raised by many persons who make arguments about how IRBs operate. The thinking is you can't really fully properly analyze beneficence if you're not confident that you can discern a well-done study from a poorly done study. If the IRB doesn't analyze the relative quality of the research, the ability to properly balance issues of beneficence, that is, are the risks and benefits for the study being properly weighed, is difficult to assess. And I think it's absolutely correct. But it's also an extremely difficult area for IRBs to manage properly. Still, doing difficult things should be something we do. So, participant treatment, how we go about making sure that we properly protect them from risks. We want to make sure that they're fully informed and advised of their rights. We've got to give them details about the study, and it's given in a document that's called informed consent, and the participant signs the informed consent. Now, in the APA version of informed consent, and these are very similar from organization to organization, you have to have in your informed consent the purpose of the research, how long you're going to be involved in it, and what are the procedures you're going to go through. You have to be told that you have a right to withdraw, you have a right to decline doing it at all. And you are told what will be the consequences of declining or withdrawing. For instance, in a study I did, we told persons that they would be paid for the amount of time they spend in the study, that they were being paid at a rate of $20 an hour, and if they left at a certain point earlier than that, they would get an appropriate partial payment, that they would not be injured in any way. Factors that may influence willingness to participate: what kind of comfort or discomfort they may feel, adverse effects of various kinds, the risks that may come from down the line. All those things must be revealed to the participant. They have to be told, what is the benefit of this? Why should you do this? What do you think? What are you helping the world to understand? And how you're going to maintain confidentiality, that the persons were involved in the research and what they presented to you as information is held in a confidential fashion. You got to tell them what are your incentives. You got to let them know what they're going to get for doing it. And a very important and subtle thing here is it's actually considered unethical to overly incentivize a study. If you get to where you're paying people too much money, then it can become a situation where how can they say no even if there's a lot of risk to it? And so in actuality, paying too much is considered an ethical violation. It has to be an appropriate amount of money compared to the prevailing standards of the time. Also, contact information, how to get a hold of the people who are in charge of managing the ethics, generally the Institutional Review Board, to let the persons know that there's an independent body out there who can check up on what's going on here if it doesn't seem to be on the up and up. If an experiment is a therapeutic treatment, if the study is a therapeutic treatment and it's an experimental one, meaning in this case that it's not been done before, it's a novel treatment and therefore its known efficacy is unknown, then you've got to note that. You've got to tell them this is not, we don't know if this is going to work. It's an experimental treatment. You've got to talk about how control groups are going to receive treatment and how people are assigned to be in the conditions in the study. You've got to let people know if they have the choice or if they're going to be randomly assigned. My father was once in a clinical trial when he had cancer, and they told people they'd be randomly assigned, but they had a choice of choosing treatments if they wanted to. And then what are the options for treatment if you chose not to participate? And then how is the compensation going to be done? Is it going to be coming from other persons? Is it going to be going to other persons even? When you're talking about at-risk populations, such as persons who may have cognitive impairment, they're under the care of a guardian or parent, or maybe some kind of a special situation, there has a great amount of care that's taken by IRBs to make sure that guardians sign the consent form and that they're treated with great care as to the risks, because especially when you're talking about children or other at-risk populations, then you may be unintentionally have expectations of their ability to understand what's going on, and it may be unfair actually to have them in the study. So they have to be given as much information as they can understand, and you have to get what is referred to as their assent to participate in the study. It's not the same thing as consent. It is assent, meaning I have an understanding of what's happening to me. Consent can only be given by the person who has the legal right to give it. And so if this person is in the care of others, they don't actually have the right to give their own consent, but they can state their assent to understanding the situation they're in. The concept of minimal risk is important here, and what we mean by minimal risk is technical actually. It's that it's no greater than the risk you might expect to encounter in everyday life through routine physical or psychological examinations. Now you may think, wait, routine physical and psychological examinations, what does that mean? We don't routinely go through those things. Well, in a sense, no. It's not like it's something we do every day. When you go to the doctor and the doctor's asking you questions about your mental health and your physical health, those are routine, and looking at your eyes, looking down your throat, and so forth. Those are routine physical and psychological examinations, and therefore those would all be consistent with minimal risk. These are things that we regularly do that we know don't have a tendency to have any lasting harm and are not unique experiences for people. Deception is sometimes necessary in studies as well. Sometimes participants are not told in the informed consent about all the procedures they are going to be subjected to. And this is in contrast to our goals of treating persons with respect. And it is a point of great controversy in actuality. A lot of discussion is ongoing on a regular basis about the use of deception in research. It's very common in social psychological research. And as you will read in your book, when you're looking at these topics on deception, you'll see that there's there's many descriptions of studies where you can tell if you did not have deception in the study, you simply couldn't learn what you're trying to learn. Now that may not be a sufficient reason to do deception, but it certainly is an important first step. You've got to clearly therefore identify to the IRB why it's necessary. And in fact, if possible, the IRB is going to try to get you to change your conditions, your procedures, so that you can reduce the amount of deception, to get it so that only that's what's necessary in terms of deception is done to get the findings that are being sought in the study. Beneficence is key in understanding where to draw the line when it comes to the use of deception. Because we obviously are putting persons at risk, we're obviously treating them in a less than fully respectful fashion. And so given that that's being done, what is the benefit? Are we learning something of sufficient quality and usefulness, that it outweighs those issues? And it is not a trivial hurdle to clear, let me assure you. You have to be it's required that you not be deceptive about any aspect of the study that might make a person choose to not participate in the study. And you have to debrief the person afterwards. You have to tell them about all the deception that was done and why it was necessary. And mostly people are completely okay with it after they hear what was going on, and they understand completely, if they'd been told the full truth from the very start, that they would not have given genuine responses that would have been as helpful in the research. Only on the rarest occasions do persons really genuinely get upset about having had a little bit of a lie told to them about the research situation. Anonymity and confidentiality are about protecting privacy, and they are important, distinctively different concepts. Optimally, all data should be collected in an anonymous fashion. And that would mean that you literally don't even know who was in your study. If someone said, well, was Joe in this class and Sally walking across the quad, were they in your study? You would genuinely not have a clue whether they were in the study or not. That's actually rather difficult to manage. It can be done at a certain level using codes and other kinds of things, but generally it's impossible because you're going to have an informed consent document often. Usually anonymity is only possible in research situations where informed consent is not needed because you're observing people in public situations. All data, therefore, is expected to be kept confidential. That is to say, it can't be seen by any persons who are not part of the study and therefore involved in the research project, and they have to be properly identified. That doesn't mean you can't put data out in a relatively public fashion, but if you do, it has to be completely anonymized and made such that no matter how much research someone did, they would not be able to track down, oh yeah, this data here, this must be from that guy named Paul who works at Frostburg State University. You should never be able to track down who supplied the research supplied the data by examining the data, and anything that could lead to that needs to be removed from the data. Now, the treatment of animal subjects is a good bit different for several obvious reasons. Animals can't give assent or consent. And in that manner, in some ways, maybe they're protected to an even greater degree than humans. Laws from the 1960s and then revised somewhat in the 1990s govern this, and they mandate that there be an institutional animal care and use committee at every institution that does research with animals. And in fact, Frostburg State University has an institutional animal care and use committee. Dr. Kennedy serves on that committee, part of the psychology faculty, and persons in biology and in other science areas on campus all serve in that area. Veterinarians are crucial. They are expected to have a veterinarian serving on the campus and to be on call for labs that are using animals. We have a veterinarian who went through special training to make sure that he was knowledgeable and skilled in working with cotton-top tamarins, even though he probably had not encountered them before we decided to have a lab here. And so we paid for this veterinarian to get that training, and then that veterinarian has the training and is available on call in case we have some difficulties with our animals, which of course can't help but happen eventually. They're living creatures, and they're going to have problems come up like any of us will. Generally, animal use is under more strict control, and the reason is they can't really give any of their consent, so we have to think about how to best treat them ourselves. And in fact, what we do know is that critics of the use of animals seem to be ignoring how animals are currently treated. And they look at studies that predate the establishment of the modern treatment guidelines for the treatment of animals. And so while it's not inappropriate that there be persons who criticize the use of animals, because the issue should be kept in the public eye to keep everybody on the up and up in how we do our work. The fact of the matter is, sometimes they're using some unfair argument tactics, using imagery and describing things in ways of how research was done in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and not so much in the 90s and since the 90s. There are 3 R's for the ethical treatments of animals. The first one is replacement. That is, when you have the opportunity, find an alternative. For instance, computer simulations can increasingly are available to do research. It's going to be many, many more years before it becomes a complete system for doing that, but we're increasingly improving our abilities to use computers. Use of different animals, use of different methods, and so forth. Refinement, the modification of procedures to minimize the stress on the animals, both in how they're treated in an everyday fashion, but also how they're treated in the study itself. Reduction, using the fewest animals possible with the constraint of good experimental design. Reduction's a tricky one. And at a certain level, someone could argue, well, you should only use 1 animal. But you're not going to learn what you need to learn. And if you really are not careful in your minimization, maybe using only 10 animals, and then you realize after you're done that, well, you actually needed 15. The way research is done, you can't just go get 5 more and call it good. You have to start all the way from the beginning with a new 15. And you ended up using 25. And that's really not the right way. The principle of reduction means use only as many as you need, but not fewer, because if you use fewer, you could end up having to redo the study and therefore greatly increase the number that you needed to use in the end. So it's a very, very careful analysis to determine what is the appropriate fewest number of animals to use. I'm going to touch briefly on another topic, which is fraud in science. Fraud happens, well, we believe it's actually some evidence that it's happening more than it used to. The pressures of publication, the pressures on how persons get tenure at some universities has gotten to the point where, well, it's getting out of hand and people are breaking the rules to try to make sure they look good. Peer review is a major safeguard for fraud, but it is not sufficient, as we've seen in recent years. We simply have a difficult time being able to discern properly done research from poorly done research. It's hard to see if the person is skilled in their writing and in their presenting of it. Replication, however, is a solid second safeguard. If if a study can't be replicated, then there's usually good reason to suspect the original study was not well done. And that's in fact how a good deal of research has been discovered to have been fraudulent, is a lack of its being replicated by outside research labs that are independent and not tied to the original researcher. Another safeguard is that all data should be shared with other scientists on demand. This is increasingly done as we've developed the ability to storage large amounts of data in public situations, on public systems, in the cloud, so to speak. We've developed the ability to have data shared widely with other scientists so that they can do their own analysis and make sure the data does not have characteristics that we know is linked to fraudulently developed data. Believe it or not, properly developed data and fraudulently developed data has unique characteristics compared to each other, and data can be analyzed to determine if it is fraudulently created. So that's the basic. By the way, your book has excellent description of the Staple incident. Researcher, social psychological researcher in the Netherlands, who, well, he did a lot of bad things, and it's a very, very interesting story to read, and I encourage it. And the next presentation I do is going to be on Chapter 5. I appreciate your attention, and thank you.